What if the most feared number in the world was never a curse but a code? What if it wasn't a prophecy but a mirror held up to a living empire? This is the hidden history of 666, the label we've given to dread itself. It sits on album covers and warning signs, flashes in horror trailers, and crawls under the skin of conspiracy blogs. But long before it was a trope, it was a puzzle whispered in an age when speaking plainly could cost you your life. Tonight, we decode the beast, not to stir panic, but to strip it of its glamour and show the living world beneath. Numbers aren't just quantities. They are carriers of spell and story. Many ancient cultures treated numbers like letters, like bodies that held meaning and temperament. To the Babylonians, the base 60 system encoded the heavens. To the Greeks, numbers sang, each with a harmony. To the Hebrew sages, numbers counted words and traced a shadow around the ineffable. So when a text as thunderous as Revelation tells you that wisdom is needed and the number of the beast is a man's number and that it is 666, it is not naming a demon. It is handing a riddle to those who know how to count. We begin with a time of flames, Rome in the 1st century, a city that called itself eternal and dressed its emperors as gods. There is a story told of a great fire when smoke braided the sky and the city's wooden heart burned. Blame drifted like ash. Tensions ran hot between imperial grandeur and strange little communities who refused incense and ceremony. Somewhere, a man named John is exiled to a rock in the Aegean, a prison cell made of sky and salt called Patmos. He writes a book where sea monsters crawl, where empire is a harlot, where emperors ride beasts and demand worship. It is called an apocalypse, which in Greek means an unveiling. In hidden language, it names what must not be said out loud. Gematria is the key that fits this ancient lock. In Hebrew and Greek, letters double as numbers. Names and phrases can be weighed, their values tallied like coins. Add the value of a name, and you can hide it in plain sight. The most convincing reading of 6666 points to a particular emperor, famous and infamous, who made Christians into torches and songs into screams. Nero Caesar, Nero Caesar. Write it in Hebrew letters, calculate their values, and you land at 66. In some early manuscripts, the number shifts to 616, and that isn't a contradiction. Switch the spelling to the Latin form, drop the Hebrew final none, and the total drops by 50. It is the same face under a different light. This is not a fringe reading invented by modern contrarians. It is attested in some of the oldest fragments we have. Papyrus 115, a tattered witness from around the 3rd century, records 6 and 16. Scholars like Irenaeus in the 2nd century knew variants existed but defended 666. He proposed other solutions too, names like Latanos or Taitan. Yet he cautioned against wild guessing. He understood that apocalyptic writing hid the dangerous in ciphers, the way sailors hide maps in riddles. And he also knew how quickly fear turns mystery into a lottery of names. But the riddle does not end with a single face. Numbers live in layers. In the ancient world, 6 is not a villain. It is a perfect number, modest and elegant, equal to the sum of its parts. 1, 2, and 3 add to 6. 6 days make a world, the 7th is a breath. In that rhythm, 7 is fullness, the circle completed. Pile 6 3 times, 6, 6, 6, and it becomes a parade of almosts. A choir that always hits one note shy of the octave. To some theologians, 6666 is imperfection magnified, a counterfeit trinity that cannot reach 7. In medieval sermons and Renaissance speculation, the number came to embody the restless engine of desire that will not rest, an empire that never stops marching. Then there is the cold logic of arithmetic, which carries its own poetry. The sum of the integers from 1 to 36 is 6666. Visualize it. a triangle of numbers, a slope of steps counting upward. 36 itself is 6 by 6, and in some occult traditions, the 6 by 6 magic square, each row and column adding to 111, multiplies to 666 across all rows. The square was associated with the sun in grimoires and talismans, and while later magicians embroidered meaning onto its borders, the bare math already feels like a trapdoor. It is an example of how pattern-making minds can be seduced by overabundance. We find patterns everywhere, and because we find them, we are sure the world is speaking to us. The world of revelation is steeped in political ritual, the imperial cult. Citizens were expected to honor the emperor as divine. Incense was not just fragrance, it was an oath. Records show that in certain times and places, proof of sacrifice could function like a civic passport. Some scholars suggest the mark on hand and forehead echoes the language of allegiance found in Jewish tradition, a rival sign to commandments and covenant. It is not a microchip prophecy or bar-coded future. It is a symbol of fealty in a world where the emperor's shadow fell across every market stall. If you would not light the incense, you were suspect. If your hand refused, your forehead marked you as other. Consider a story. A scribe sits in Alexandria, the city that fed on paper and thought. A candle gutters on his desk as he copies a line. Let the one with understanding calculate the number of the beast. He hesitates. His exemplar says 616, but other copies couriered across deserts and seas say 6666. He knows both can be justified, and yet this choice feels heavier than ink. He decides, and in that choice, the beast wears a slightly different mask in 100 churches. History is made not only by kings and fires, but by the tiny tremors of human hands. The number also haunts the older layers of scripture like a premonition. In the books of Kings and Chronicles, Solomon's annual gold intake is recorded as 666 talents. The detail is not a curse, but a caution. A king who begins in wisdom and ends in weight. The figure sits in the narrative like a hook for the attentive, foreshadowing a drift from covenant to empire. In Ezra, a family named Adonikam sends 666 descendants back from exile. There's no demon in the census, but there is a felt tug, a reminder that numbers are never simple ink when meaning is involved. Outside the Mediterranean, the numbers aura shatters into multiplicity. In modern Chinese internet slang, 666, liu liu liu, means smooth, skilled, cool. It is shouted in gaming chats to applaud a clever play. The same digits that drip dread from Western billboards become a thumbs up in another tongue. Culture nails the mood onto the number like a banner onto a pole. In this, 6666 reveals its true nature. It is a weather vane, not the wind. If the number points to an emperor, it is also pointing to a pattern, the hungry marriage of politics and worship. Apocalyptic literature is not primarily a lens for tomorrow. It is a shout into the present, smuggled through visions so it can cross borders. It says that when power demands your conscience, when your wallet is stamped with your worship, you have met the beast's mark. Sometimes that beast wore a laurel. Sometimes it wears a logo. And yes, sometimes it wears a smile in a boardroom. Mythologists and psychologists read differently. Joseph Campbell and his strain of thought would see the beast as an archetype of overreaching order, the dragon that hoards and devours novelty. Carl Jung, had he weighed the number more than in passing, might have recognized the play of the shadow, mass ideology seeking adoration, the inflation of the state into a god image, the scapegoating of whatever refuses to merge. To them, 6666 is a mask for something very human, the timeless temptation to mistake control for godhood, to worship our own machine. Historians, cautious as archivists must be, prefer the concrete. They point to coins stamped with imperial titles, to temple remains where incense once rose, to legal inscriptions and letters that administer civic loyalty. They map the early manuscript landscape and follow the ink. They remind us that Revelation is a letter to 7 real assemblies in Asia Minor, not a puzzle for strangers 2,000 years later to assign to their enemies. The beast is on their coin. The mark is their certificate. The number is near enough to whisper into their ears. Artists and sensationalists turned this whisper into thunder. In the 20th century, 66666 stalked cinema aisles and paperback racks. The omen fixed it on a child's scalp as a birthmark, which inspired an entire phylum of movies where evil can be scanned like a barcode. Heavy metal scraped it across leather jackets and guitar picks, both sincere and theatrical. It climbed onto tattoos as a dare, a badge of affront. And in the fluorescent corners of conspiracy forums, the number soaked into everything from cereal boxes to software updates. A rumor once claimed that barcodes were a stealth mark because of the way guard bars could be read. This is not true, but the rumor had the perfect ingredients: technology's anxious glow and an old fear given a new costume. We need to say this carefully. Symbols can be dangerous when we want them to do our thinking for us. It is easier to blame a number than to notice how our own hands give allegiance, how our own foreheads bend. The mark is easier to stamp on others than to find on our debit cards and timelines. This is what apocalyptic language beats like a drum. The beast is not just a person, it is the system that asks for your heart and offers the world in exchange. If this kind of dark decoding pulls you in, subscribe and keep the bell close. More forbidden numbers and texts are coming. The other layer is play. Numbers seduce. The brain loves coincidence like a cat loves sunlight. Sum the numbers 1 through 36 and you land on 666. This will feel like a wink. Notice how a 6-day creation mirrors the rhythm of weeks. Watch how 3 6s echo triple emphasis in ancient rhetoric. Calculate magic squares and trace them onto talismans. You begin to feel a hand on your shoulder, but pattern is not proof. The mathematician knows that clusters and runs happen. The magician steps into them and names them fate. Between those two stands the historian, reminding us that context is king and that a code without a world to inhabit is just a flourish. There is a temptation to sanitize Revelation, to smother its symbols in abstraction until they are safe as wallpaper. But this text was born in a furnace. Its readers lived within reach of the lash. Their choice to refuse religious obligations to the emperor was not a mere theological preference, it was a political act. The number 666 becomes, in this light, a rallying cry and a warning label. Beware what demands all of you. Beware what makes buying and selling dependent on your worship. Beware the empire that teaches you to see your neighbor as the price of your security. Even so, the number refuses to stay in one pen. Medieval numerology wandered through it like a forest, hunting omens and weaving them into chronologies. Renaissance occultists borrowed the 6x6 square to link the number to the sun, speculating about power and charisma. In later centuries, sects measured popes or politicians against the number and declared their time the last time, their enemy the beast. The wheel turned, names changed, and yet the number endured because the structure it describes, the marriage of power and devotion, is a renewable resource. Strip the fear from it, and 666 is a powerful reminder about how we read. The ancients embedded puzzles as acts of resistance. Ciphers like gematria allowed critique to survive, where swords were sharp and law was quick. To rediscover that is to honor the courage of those who wrote under threat. It's also to resist the gravity of lazy superstition, to refuse to turn every Friday receipt into a premonition. We can hold the wonder and the caution together. The number is a beautiful knot. The world it points to is our responsibility. Modern echoes proliferate. You've seen the number on album covers and tour posters, a borrowed menace that sells tickets. You may have seen it threaded into ARGs and horror games, where glyphs and numbers summon dread with the efficiency of a jump scare. You will find it on t-shirts in tourist stalls, its power declawed by repetition, made into a mascot. Yet now and then, amid the camp and commerce, the old nerve is struck. A news story about surveillance bleeds into a sermon about marks and mandates, and suddenly the number is a lens again. Be careful with that glass. It magnifies real concerns, privacy, coercion, while also inviting old myths to masquerade as headlines. There is a sober truth worth keeping. Empire likes to be adored. Whether it builds statues or brands, it asks your posture to reflect your loyalty. Revelation's warning remains surgical. If buying and selling require worship, something monstrous sits on the throne. You can disagree with the theology and still feel the ethical heat of that. You can be a skeptic and recognize the genius of encoding dissent in a number, in a story, in a beast that is and is not. The symbol remains a match you can light to see the room you're in. So what is 666, finally? It is a number that wears masks. It is Nero and not Nero, a cipher for one man and a mirror for all men who would be gods. It is a math trick and a moral compass, a pop trope and a flare, fired from an island prison. It is a triple whisper that says, pay attention. We make beasts quickly. We line up to take their marks more quickly still. If we understand the code, we might slow down long enough to say no when no matters. Step back from the superstition, and the number becomes a way to teach ourselves how to read any symbol. Ask where it came from. Ask who spoke it first and to whom. Ask what danger made it necessary, what hope it protected in its ciphers. Learn the arithmetic, but also learn the world into which the arithmetic was born. When you do, the fear drains out of the numbers and returns to its proper home, the choices of human hands. The fear of 6666 is a kind of talisman itself, a gathered superstition that can frighten us into the same incurious obedience the text warned against. Let it instead become a scalpel. Cut away hysteria, and you find a fierce wisdom. Beware rulers who ask for worship. Beware economies that demand your conscience as collateral, and beware our own appetite for simple monsters. They are easy to fight and impossible to learn from. And if you are tempted to chase every shadow cast by 3 sixes, remember the gamer shouting "Liu, Liu, Liu" in delight. Remember that numbers change their clothes when they cross borders. Remember the scribe in Alexandria, choosing a digit and shaping a world. Remember the ash on Patmos, the candle sputter, the stubborn courage to write in images so your truth can outlive your body. The beast is a story, and stories can be fought with better stories. In that spirit, consider this closing image. A coin glints in torchlight, stamped with a laureled head. On the rim are numerals that no peasant could read, but every merchant obeys. Somewhere, a letter is read aloud in a small house. Sea salt still clings to the parchment. The listeners look at one another and understand the code. They make a choice. The choice is not made once in history. It is made again and again, in every age where power seeks worship. The number is an echo. It will always be there, if we are brave enough to hear what it is saying and wary enough not to worship our own fear.